What makes a game replayable? Think about when you learn how to play tic-tac-toe. You might have loved tic-tac-toe first. It was so exciting and so fun, but unfortunately you probably eventually kind of figured it out and there wasn't a whole lot to offer there. It wasn't a very replayable game. But most of us have other games that we played and we played and we played again and we still love playing them even after countless plays and owning it for years and years and years. But even though it's something that we really want, and it's definitely a topic that we talk about a lot amongst ourselves, right? We're like, hey, that game looks fun, but is it replayable? I don't think we're very good often at determining what makes a game actually replayable. Now this is a topic that I've thought about in my own head for years and years and years, but I recently got a game that's actually an expansion to a game I already love. And after playing it, it really pushed me kind of over the edge. It made me really want to organize my thoughts and make a video about it. More on that game in a little bit. Now I have a working theory or premise I'm going to sort of throw out here at the beginning so we're all on the same page. Replayability is primarily based on the core of a game, being an interesting, enjoyable, or strategic experience that offers players a wide range of options to explore. Now here's why I think that statement is a little bit off the beaten path. It's a little bit bold. Most of us gamers assume that variability is the primary ingredient in replayability. We see a game that offers once a turn event cards that give you some mission or goal for that turn, or a game that has randomly selected tiles that determine endgame score or endgame win conditions, and we immediately think, oh wow, that game must have a lot of replayability. Look at how much is changing all the time. Viticulture is one of my favorite games that exist on this planet. I think it's one of the greatest games of all time. I have played it so many times I can't even count, so obviously I think it has an extremely high amount of replayability. And the core of the game offers so many strategic routes that you can take. You can start off the game, just try to gather enough money to train a couple workers so that in future seasons you'll be able to take more actions. You also could choose, hey, turn one, I just want to get a lot of grapes in the ground and go ahead and try to harvest some of those. I already have some grapes coming down the line. You could also choose to draw some order cards so you can see what kind of grapes and what kind of wines will I need in the future to harvest. And the fact that all these strategies can be good, viable strategies that will win you the game is what makes the game so excellent. Now the expansion that I mentioned at the beginning that kind of inspired me to make this video is the expansion for Viticulture. It's called Viticulture World, and for starters it turns viticulture into a cooperative game, but also adds a ton of variability. Now at the beginning of every year, you're going to flip out an event card, which will have different effects. Sometimes an action spot you can go to, so find a little reward for going to particular action spots. You also have a whole bunch of upgrade tiles, which are really exciting. They get set out there and you can purchase them and actually overlay parts of the board with upgrade tiles so that spots you went to before and did actions, now those actions are even more powerful. So there's tons of new and exciting content. I think the easy reaction is to say, wow, they just made viticulture even more replayable because, I mean, every turn you're going to have a different effect maybe in play for that turn. Every game, the order those upgrade tiles come out in are going to change what spots you want to go to on the board. Well, actually, for me, even though these are really fun additions, and even though they do change the game a lot from play to play, it actually cuts down on the replayability. And that is because the elements added to the game are so powerful that you really should go to them, and often you kind of need to utilize them to have a chance at winning the game. I won't go into all the details, but basically if you don't go to a lot of the event cards, you won't get enough influence to win the game. If you don't upgrade certain spots, you can only put one or maybe two workers per spot depending on player count, and you'll get kind of like jammed up at certain spots by the end of the game. So by giving you all these events, it kind of takes away the open-endedness of the original game. That open-ended strategy that kind of made you feel like, wow, I have so many options. All these spots could help me. What order, what sequence makes the most sense? Now things are just a little more directed. Now, am I trying to say that event cards are always bad and they're horrible and they always make the replayability go down? No, not at all. Please don't go down to the comments and say Ryan thinks that all event cards and all tiles that change out from game to game are always horrible. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, sometimes they can add to the replayability. The purpose of the statement is just to show that it doesn't always add to the replayability. It's not a guarantee. When you flip out a game and you say, oh, this game has event card, it doesn't automatically mean that the game has to be more playable. It might be neutral and it might reduce the replayability. It's just you have to not use that metric to necessarily decide whether a game is replayable or not. Another really good example is the game of Suburbia. Now, Suburbia is a city building game that is really cool. You can jump in there and just start building houses right away to build your population, try to get the most points that way. You could also build commercial buildings, just try to get try to get a lot of money so you can afford the nice tiles as the game goes along. You could also go for government buildings that's going to raise your popularity, but also you might struggle with money. And you could also try to balance all three strategies and get popular enough and have enough income to basically end up the end of the game with the highest population. But the highest population doesn't always win. The end game score tiles that are flipped out randomly every game have such a large impact on the game. A majority of the games that I've played have been won by the person who simply acquired the most end game score tokens. So it cuts down on that really cool wide open strategy. What do you want to go for? Do you want to build airports? Do you want, well, I should build airports because this tile says if I have the most airports, I get bonus points. So you see, it's not necessarily bad. It is have an element of fun sometimes, but it also makes the game be less interesting. It gives you less options. Now, once again, I'll add, I'm not saying that these things never add to variability. Sometimes they do. My point is it's just not a guarantee. It should not be an automatic assumption in our minds. So with that being said, how can we find games that are replayable? How many of you have had this happen to you before? You have a friend who finds a new board game and they love it. They declare this is one of the best games they ever play. You see that friend a few days later, a week later, it's all they can talk about. The next 5 times you see them, all they do is say, hey, have you played this? It's such a good game, you gotta play it. It's one of the best games ever. It has so many cool things going on. Like, I think it's the greatest. And I've sold all my other games in that genre because this is just the replacement. This is the answer to the game I've always been seeking. And then 3 or 6 months go by, you finally get a chance to play the game. And when you see them, you're like, hey, I played the game. I did it. It was so cool. And they go, yeah, it's a good game. I'm just kind of burned out on it now. What? Like, that's all you could talk about for like a month. It was the only thing in your mind. And they just kind of say, well, yeah, it was fun, but yeah, I'm not really interested in taking it out anymore. I sold it last month. You feel like the excitement that you should have been able to share with them just fizzled out. And this person who declared this game was super interesting and maybe even very replayable has now a few months later just lost interest. Now, I don't believe that your friends are intentionally trying to trick you into playing board games, but I do have a theory as to why this seems to happen quite often. Us gamers are most likely to talk about a new game right after we first experience it. I mean, not even really gamers. This kind of applies to everyone. You're most likely to talk about your new vehicle, whether you like it or hate it, right after you buy it. And then basically with games, what happens is we might play it 3 to 5 times. We might really like it and we're at our height. We're just talking about it a ton. Then over the next couple months, it comes to the table less and less and less. And eventually it kind of fizzles out. We don't play it again. But by that point, we're interested in something new. So we don't talk about it at that point. We only talked about it right after we played it. So the issue is, at the very beginning of liking a game, you can only assume or you can only infer from what you see that you think the game has a lot of replayability. Maybe the 3 games you played had 3 different win conditions, and because of all that variability, you think, wow, this game is going to be really replayable. But that's only an assumption. You only think at that point it's going to hold your attention for 10 or 20 plays. You don't really know at that point. But again, this is the point when we're most likely to tell our friends a game is great, a game is amazing, a game is replayable. This applies to you, it applies to your friends, and even applies to videos you watch on YouTube about board games. We've all heard reviewers who say something along the lines of, this game is great, and it also comes with 5 different cards that can overlay that action spot, so it's going to change out from game to game, so this game is really replayable. Now, while those words can be spoken earnestly and honestly, the same principle kind of applies. That person might not have played the game enough times to really know if the core of the game is going to hold their interest for maybe 50 plays. So who can you trust? Well, for starters, don't automatically assume that if a game comes with event cards, or it comes with campaign modes, or it comes with randomly shuffled win conditions, that you will automatically love it for years and years and years. That does not necessarily equate to replayability. Also be careful not to take the advice of people who have only played a game a couple times, but say they just know this game is going to be super replayable. Maybe they're right, but maybe they're not. They can't really know yet. So I think one of the best places to start is when you get recommendations from people who have games that they have literally liked for years. Take me, for example. Let's say I recommend a game to you and I say, hey, Wayfarers of the South Tigers is really cool. I think it's a really neat game. I played it between 5 and 10 times, and I think it's going to be pretty replayable. Or I might say I have a game called Seven Wonders Duel that I really love. It's very replayable. I played it over 100 times in my life. Well, both statements could be true, but there is a much better chance that Seven Wonders Duel is going to be the game that ends up being more replayable. We just simply don't know yet with Wayfarers. Now, one last thought on new games. If you're someone who likes to go out there and get the newest game, it is simply really, really hard to know whether a new game is going to be replayable. You are going to be one of the people who are buying the game and making those decisions. There's not going to be near as much information out there for you to collect on whether or not the game is replayable before you jump into it. Now, for me personally, when I'm hunting for a new game that doesn't have a lot of data out there yet, doesn't have any friends I can ask what they think about it, I'm kind of on my own. If I'm trying to find a game that I think will be really replayable, I also kind of look for a certain level of complexity or an idea that I think is going to be really, really fun. If there's a really fun idea and I like it, I'd be like, cool, that could be really replayable because I might want to do that a lot. It seems exciting and fun. But if it's going to be a more strategic game, I often seek out games kind of in that medium weight because I kind of assume that complexity, if the rulebook seems like it has a lot going on, has a bunch of different action spots, a bunch of different options, the odds are higher that you're going to have more things you can do and basically add to more replayability. If you read a rule book and you see some reviews online, people say the game is so cool because there's only 2 things you can do in your turn, you just choose one of those 2 things and your turn is over. Well, it could be really cool. It could be really exciting. But again, if you don't have any more knowledge to go off of, my gut kind of tells me, okay, that could be fun, but it might not be super replayable. Not saying it's bad, not saying it's a bad game, but the purpose of this video is whether something is or is not replayable. Now, I am sick of saying the word replayable, and you are probably sick of hearing the word replayable. So we're going to wrap this video up now. Of course, if you enjoyed it, hitting the like button down below is really cool. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. See ya.